Hello again, friends, and good afternoon, and welcome to Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, right here, where it is you find it every week, or wherever you want to find it. It really doesn't matter, as long as you do end up here. I am your host.
Fuck, you just, God damn it, Jesus.
The great Brian Last, and the man you hear back there interrupting, being unprofessional, cackling, all of the above, Mr. Jim Cornette.
You changed your shit up. And then it just derailed you, and you went off into the fucking weeds, and you never recovered. You did the bobble thing and then turned over on your side with the wherever you're fucking finding this shit. Just like we leave this shit laying on the side of the road. Just leave it sitting out like the Mid-Atlantic classic films. And waiting for the garbage to come pick it up. Just like a piece of garbage. You've just presented this show. Laid it out on the side of the street, and because we're not doing what we usually do. We're taping at a different time, and it's thrown you off. But consider me. What about me? Because 2 weeks ago, we did this program. They were ripping and tearing the gutters off the castle here around me as we spoke and applying new ones. And then last week was when I just come down with the Susie flu and had blamed Fort Wayne for it and was on antibiotics, and I'm just getting over that. There's still some remnants. I still have a few problems with ugly globs of phlegm after the election. Of course, we all have problems still with a few ugly globs of phlegm. But now you've just thrown the show into chaos right as soon as we open it.
I apologize. I apologize profusely. I am off my game, as you said, because we're not recording at our normal time. Although in some
that's
ways,
no excuse. I've been up. I've had a stressful day.
Stressful
day. I woke up having to urinate and couldn't go back to sleep.
Well, I mean,
didn't get for a senior citizen such as myself, didn't get the appropriate amount of sleep.
Oh, you're not.
And I've been working through this illness, through this sickness. I've been working steadily, diligently.
Yeah, it must be hard counting all that cash when you're sick.
No, it doesn't come in cash. The revenue from the holiday merchandise sale at JimCornette.com. It doesn't come in fistfuls of cash. It comes in electronic payments. But that's not the point. You're being crass. You're making it sound crass. I was about to say what a labor of love that I've been going through to fill these orders for the Cult of Cornette faithful, ordering from Cornette's Collectibles, despite my illness, despite my advanced age and near senility, and the ridiculous taping schedule that you put me through. I'm doing all this just for the people, and you tried to make it a crass, money-making, greedy opportunity like I'm some fucking Republican. I differ with you, sir. I take exception to that.
Well, I will gladly take the realms as being the capitalist pig here on the show. But, Jim, let me ask you something.
Wait, have I got to add that on Tuesdays to the experience to Mr. Co-host and all it does in the capital pig?
No. But I do have to ask you. You're talking about Cornette's Collectibles, obviously JimCornette.com. Now I'm trying to make you money, so smile. People could go there and get all this merchandise. And I noticed, because a lot of people tweet it, and I know you see it, you send them something and they'll say, look what Jim Cornette signed for me. And obviously a lot of people request different things. What are the funniest lines that you've written recently? Anything pop you?
Oh, well, there's a few things, but sometimes you have to know the individual because some of these are repeat customers. But there's a very strange and bizarre things that are asked. But I honor those requests because I will say the most requested dedication is either thank you, fuck you, bye, or fuck Vince Russo. I mean, it's right there in a tie, really. But and people want me to cuss them on Twitter now. I'm doing that sometimes as a free service. But I'll sign anything except a check that you order from JimCornette.com, and the prices are so dirt cheap, folks. I don't mean to brag. Actually, it's not bragging. I'm an idiot. I'm practically giving this stuff away. I'm shipping it all across the country and around the world practically for free, to the point where now people are ordering multiple DVDs, the $9 DVD sale, ordering multiple DVDs for stocking stuffers because they're really so cheap now. 10 hours of wrestling gold for $9 in a library case autographed. So you just take care of the fans in your life, in your family, or in your social circle, stocking stuffers and that type of thing. But also the various T-shirts are flying off the shelves. But the Cult of Cornette membership certificate, of course, is possibly our most popular holiday item this year. For $10, we've talked about the heavy card stock with the Pledge of Allegiance, which I won't go through right now, but filled out in your name, real or assumed, signed by Jim Cornette, making it official and provable in court that you are a member of the Cult of Cornette. Only $10. But all these, the action figures, the books, the burger towels, restraining orders, JimCornette.com, the holiday sale. Take care of the wrestling fans in your life. Or send a thank you, fuck you, bye picture to your favorite politician.
Well, there you go.
Especially one of the ones that have lost recently, and they're still counting in Florida. Reversal. We'll talk about it more on The Experience this week, and in Georgia. But, and in Arizona. It's like the fucking millions and millions of people voted in these states, and the Arizona Senate race is now apart like, 6,000? And a Democrat looks like she probably will win, and they're down to where they have to – normally when you cast 8 million votes in an election, you don't have to really even – it's a mathematical not necessary to count every single mail-in ballot and absentee ballot, but they're down to the fucking nub on this, down to nut cutting time, as Jim Ross would say.
Well, as we saw in 2000, you got to be careful when all these things happen and they start arguing over votes and what ballot is good and what ballot is bad. You may end up having to get an attorney. You may end up having to really get in there and make sure that your vote is counted.
You know, that's true. And as a matter of fact, and I was just speaking about this same subject the other day to our good friend Stephen P. New of the New Law Office.
Oh, him.
Yeah, that guy. NewLawOffice.com, 888-692-8084. Because I was saying, look at here. Stephen has pretty much cornered the market. I don't want to say that, but dominated the field. How about that? In getting millions of dollars in judgments against all these big companies that fuck the little guy over. He's the champion of the little guy. The normal folks like us, protecting the babies born and unborn, addicted to opioids, people given cancer by dangerous chemicals, victims of negligence, carelessness, and greed. We've talked about it before. He's a real American who fights for the rights of every man. If he can take his incredible expertise in this field and join up, I said he ought to do this, the ultimate dream team with Michael Avenatti. Because after all, a porn star who can take down a president because of Michael Avenatti. If Avenatti can get a porn star to take down a president, and Stephen P. New can get a little guy in West Virginia to take down Monsanto, and he's got cases right now against BP, Exxon, all the big pharmaceutical companies, Amazon, Universal, Marriott, and General Motors even. We're not safe from any of these people. I think a dream team with Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, they would just be blown out of the water. That's what I think should happen. I think they should join forces, and we would all they could save the world. Stephen P. New and Michael Avenatti.
Avenatti's got a porn star. Now we got to get a porn star for Stephen.
Well, that may be on his own time. As Watts told Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler, where's the blowjobs? Well, you can take care of that on your own time.
I meant to represent.
I thought you were talking about getting Stephen a pull. Well, they got him a stripper for his bachelor party, I understand. But, the guy wanted to get paid in cash, and nobody had any on him, so they kicked him right out. Anyway.
This is how we treat our sponsors.
He's one of us. He understands these things. It's all in the course of podcasting and all. It's podcasting amongst bros. That's what it is.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that.
Anyway, what's the premise of this program?
Well, how do you get in touch with Stephen if you want to sue somebody?
Oh, well, I said that before. You should have been paying attention when I said it before. It's ingrained in everyone's psyche and their synapses. It's New Law Office, NEW, newlawoffice.com, or 888-692-8084 if you got one of them fancy things that makes telephone calls.
That's right. And after you win your case, you can talk wrestling with Stephen. He is an expert and a fun guy to talk to. Knows his ICW, knows his PAFOs. So good stuff there. But Jim
he knows it. That's the only time that those English words have been used in that order this week. He knows his Paphos.
There's Angelo Poffo, Randy Poffo, Lanny Poffo, and Angelo's father was
Old Man Poffo. I don't.
Silvio Poffo.
I was not aware of that.
Yes. I have a lot of his old programs from Chicago that he ordered when his son was wrestling there. They were sent to his house.
Oh, yeah, you have to rub that in again.
Well, Jim, the premise of this show, as some may remember, is we read listener questions. The listener questions are sent in various ways, various methods, including via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru. And we have
and they can also be sent telepathically. Just think real hard. Hey, Jim, here's a question, and see if I get it.
Well, who's it going to, though, me or you?
Oh, well, I guess, okay, you'll have to say, hey, Brian, here's a question, and think real hard, and then Brian will telepathically absorb it and ask it of me. And in my borderline mystical way, I will divine the answer.
Well, let's see how hard they were thinking this week. Our first question, Jim, sent in the CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matthew Rogers. I've been watching some early to mid-'80s TBS wrestling. Most every main event star, Ric Flair included, wrestled an enhancement talent. Why did Dusty Rhodes not?
Okay, that was a sudden left turn at the end. Well, in a lot of cases, especially when Flair was the champion from 83, 84, 85, 86, during Dusty's booking run, Flair wouldn't work either unless it was a special match with George South or some kind of, competitive angle match or whatever. He usually just did a promo. But Dusty was also producing the show. He was sitting back in the control room, and he was producing the whole thing, and he was writing the whole thing. And he came out and he did a promo, which was his best thing. At that point, Dusty didn't need to go out there and beat, fucking Art Pritz in a 5-minute squash match to be over. And it was just, he, as I told Joe Koff one time in Ring of Honor, he could pop the corn too, but he didn't need to. But in the early 80s, Dusty still had squash matches on TBS also, because from the time that the show really got on, not TBS, but when TBS became a superstation of any note, when it stopped going to just a few places and, started getting a decent distribution, most of the guys from Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, any of the NWA territories, guest stars from Mid-South would come in to be on TBS and get a win. And hopefully get a promo also, which made them bigger stars, not just the guys in Georgia, but it made them bigger stars in the territories that they were working regularly in. And also a lot of those names would come into Georgia and work at the Omni. So everybody, even because I've seen a bunch of Dusty squash matches on TBS in the early 80s, but by the time he was booking it, at that point, I think the less of Dusty just out there wrestling for the sake of it was probably a blessing instead of a curse.
The best Dusty squash match, I don't know if it's still on YouTube because it got pulled down a few years ago and then it would pop back up and get pulled down again. Dusty Rhodes versus Sylvana Sousa and John Arezzi under his wrestling name of, I think, John Anthony. John, not being a trained wrestler, accidentally stiffs Dusty at some point. He was wrestling a handicap match, and Dusty elbows John in the face and then pins him after he throws John on top of Sylvana Sousa and then sits on John's head while he pins him. But on this topic.
Well, wait, I got one for you. Hold on and save that thought. But because somebody just tweeted this the other day, this little 30-second clip. I think it was the Road Warriors debut.
Yeah.
On Worldwide Wrestling. Jim Crockett's #1 syndicated show, right? And it was in the middle of 85, I think, and they were taping probably in one of the South Carolina towns like Gaffney or Shelby or whatever that they would tape in during that period. And one of the opponents of the Road Warriors, I can't remember who the other one was, but immaterial anyway, but one of them was Ron Rossi. And we worked with Ron Rossi, and he was one of those guys that had got broken in around South Carolina and did some of the real small independent shows that existed down there with the outlaw shows at the time with a lot of those guys. And a lot of them have been trained by, you know, somebody that did jobs more regularly on TV. I mean, I liked all those guys and they did wonderful jobs for the Midnight Express, but some of them were just judging them purely by their wrestling ability and not by their good intentions. They were fucking rotten. And poor old Ron Rossi was one of them. He looked like Ned. He had this short hair combed over to the side and this little mustache, and his body looked like a baked potato. And he was pale, and he just poor thing, right? And he looked like he was in his mid-30s at that point. He just one of those guys that he looked like the guy on The Office. What's his name? The mushy guy. Anyway, so if Animal shoots him off and tries to clothesline him, and somehow he fucked the clothesline up the first time where he didn't really get hit by it and he kind of stumbled and did something. So then Animal shoots him off again to clothesline him. And this time Ron looked like he took a knee to the gut and just kind of rolled over underneath it. Animal swung and missed the whole thing and stumbled. So then as Rossi's getting up on the other side, Animal just walks over to him and just a straight right. Bam! Right to the fucking face, and Rossi just crumbles. And fucking Animal just looks at him for a second and tags Hawk, and Hawk jumps on the fucking, dead body and does something to him and pins him 1, 2, 3. But I mean, you had to do it. You only got one take, and guys are trying to get over in front of a fucking rabid audience. And if the job guys put themselves in that position, sometimes they got rewarded for it.
On that topic, do you think Ric Flair gave too much to the undercard guy? When I say undercard, I'm saying job guys nicely, but do you think he gave too much to the job guys on TV when he would work against them?
Yes. Eddie, because he was so unselfish, because he knew he was over and he was going to get over no matter what. But at the same point, it was somewhat. And I mean, and everybody loved to see him work with George South because that was, George was so good. It's just that he had never been used in a position where he should be logically competitive for that long a period of time with the world champion. But Rick liked to make guys and help guys get over better. But I think sometimes, yeah, he did try to have too competitive of a match with anybody that he was matched on TV with just because he could. Even Ric Flair is sometimes fucking proof that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Jim, our next question was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matt Keene. He had previously sent in some questions about 1987, which a lot of people seem to like, so we have a few more from him here this week. Question 1 for you, Jim.
Oh, so he's trying to take the show over, is what you're saying.
He wants to talk 1987 Jim Crockett Promotions with you.
He's trying to take the show over and get to be a big star and a big name and trying to make a name for himself off of my reputation here on the program. I know what he's doing.
Question 1. Who the hell is Bugsy McGraw? Is he just a poor man's Jimmy Valiant? Or was he a big deal somewhere at some point? I am completely unfamiliar with him.
Oh, God, no. And Bugsy he actually was in the same group as Handsome Jimmy in Memphis in like 81? And God, that was, yeah, that was. No, Bugsy was completely different than Handsome, though, when Handsome was crazy. Bugsy was crazy in a different way. He had worked as the Brute, as a heel, just a big bearded fucking heel, because Bugsy was like at that time 4-ish and 320 or 30 pounds. It looked like it wasn't a huge, great muscular body, but he was huge. And then he had been a heel and he was used a lot in Florida. He just kind of connected with people for what, not only as a heel, but then when they switched him babyface, he had those weird promos he would do where I can't even attempt to do Bugsy McGraw. Can you? No. And
Not at all.
And I mean, he'd wear the aviator's cap and, he was crazy, but he was also a big kick-ass fucker. And that's the way they used him in Florida. He didn't get over in Memphis the time he was here really because, I mean, it was okay, but he didn't have the history So they didn't really understand. They in Florida, they kind of saw him go crazy, right? I guess. But over here, he was just crazy. And his work by that point in time was not. He was a gimmick babyface in Florida that had a history and a backstory and was over. Whereas in Memphis, he came in as the gimmick crazy heel, and he couldn't hold up to the in ring of some of the other heels we'd had at that point. But he was, and he had runs as a heel as Bugsy in the 70s up in the WWF, a big monster against the champion. I think Bruno and Pedro probably both, right? But he's just one of those guys that he was very unique. And it wouldn't have worked if anybody else had done it.
In 81, he joins the First Family, replacing Kevin Sullivan and Wayne Ferris, who left the week before.
Yes.
And again, he has no history, so he comes out there.
He'd been in the magazine. He'd been in the magazines. So if you were one of the fans that read the wrestling magazines, and he may have been on TBS some, so he was a heard of name, but he had never worked Memphis before.
Right, and he comes out there, and he's wearing just like a vest and like John Lennon sunglasses, no top hat or anything else. And he does this promo, but he looks like your accountant dressed up like a wrestler. And yeah, he was not, let's put it this way, out of that group of the First Family, Chick Donovan, Coco Ware, he was easily the worst of that group.
Well, no, don't say worst. Say most athletically challenged. But his interviews were probably still better than Coco's, even though he never was supposed to make sense, because Coco was trying to make sense and didn't. Buddy Landel, I gonna lack 'em your Burgum.
Wait, what?
Buddy Landel went out on Memphis TV one morning. And he cut this promo because he had not only the Mid-America Heavyweight Championship, but some other belt.
So this is 83.
This was in 83. He may have been, I don't know if he was Southern champion, but he had the Mid-America belt or some other kind of belt or whatever. He said, it's a burden. It's a burden carrying around all these championships, all this gold, Lance Russell, and he walks off. And so Coco was wrestling him, Monday night to Coliseum. So Coco comes out and does his interview. And I think that's when he was Sweet Brown Sugar also. So he may have had the mask on, but Coco was somewhat mumbled sometimes anyway. And he said, well, I tell you what, Buddy Landel, I'm going to lack 'em your Burgum. He meant to say, I'm going to lighten your burden. But he said, I'm going to lack 'em your Burgum. And when Susie came back, Buddy's like, what the fuck? Did you say you're going to like 'em my Burgum? What the fuck? And that's the same. That was like, 6 months, maybe even after. Mad Dog Boyd. Mad Dog Boyd. And the reason why that, and we're not breaking any new ground here. We've told the story, but since the YouTube channel is spotty right now, originally Pork Chop Cash and Iceman King Parsons were going to come in and be the Bruise Brothers. They were going to dress in just like the Bruise Brothers in Memphis did, with the sunglasses and the hats and the suit coats, and take off on the Blues Brothers. And they were going to be in Jimmy Hart's First Family. But like the week beforehand, Iceman Parsons instead he got the offer to go to Dallas, where he had the biggest singles push, I guess, of his entire career. So he made the right choice there, right? But so it left Pork Chop Cash in two suits. And the Mad Dog had been an outlaw guy from Mississippi that would actually come and hang around the parking lot and talk to the guys when they came in for Saturday morning studio show, trying to get booked or get a job or whatever. And somebody said, I think Lawler said to Jimmy Hart, go out there and see if he fits the jacket, right? And he did. He got the jacket on. So Mad Dog Boyd became the other Bruise brother. Well, Mad Dog had not only never been on television before, had never done an interview, because at that point, they didn't even, in the independents, the outlaw shows, they didn't even have video cameras. So he's never done an interview and has wrestled only sparingly. So within a couple of fucking weeks, they get an interview where Pork Chop handles most of it, but then they give Mad Dog a chance to say something. And Pork Chop been talking about how bad they were, about how bad the Bruise Brothers were. And Mad Dog said, that's right. We're so bad, we eat Popeye. What? And we all in the locker room said, what? And Lawler looked around. Everybody looked around and said, did he just say he's so bad he eats Popeye? So he came back. Well, apparently what he was trying to say was, we're so bad we eat barbed wire. But with not only his Mississippi accent and his squeaky voice, but his hysteria at speaking to 300,000 people live, he said, we're so bad we eat Popeye.
There's a lot of that seemingly in Memphis where guys went on TV and said something, and as soon as they came back, someone said, what did you say? Did that happen with you when you yelled Terry Funk's name on TV?
Yeah, well, they said afterward when I came back there, somebody, it may have been Guy Coffey or whatever, said that the director up in the booth thought that I just screamed fuck at the top of my lungs when I said funk. But I mean, just, stuff happened every once in a while where somebody, I can't believe in all those, and think about this. This is a tribute to the professionalism of all that talent. They did a weekly live pro wrestling show in that town for 40 years, and you could probably count on two hands when somebody said something on a live mic that they really should not have said, like when Gorgeous George Jr. accidentally called Bill Dundee a chicken shit worm. And and a few other things, but it wasn't, the guys didn't get carried away often. I mean, they said some things that probably wouldn't fly today, but nothing that should have been bleeped.
Well, part 2 of Matt's question here, Jim, back to 1987, Jim Crockett Promotions. Did Bill Dundee have heat with someone in the promotion? He comes in as a tag team with Buddy Landel, who disappears very quickly, probably due to being Buddy Landel. Then Bill is in a tag team with the Barbarian and managing the Mod Squad, who are awful, in the Crockett Cup. Was Bill primarily working UWF at the time? Was there some sort of limit on the number of daddies on the show with Bill and Dusty on the same show? So what is the deal? When Bill Dundee came in 87, what was going on?
Well, he had actually at that point, 86, he had gone back to Memphis and had a good run with Buddy Landel as a tag team, and they worked the deal with Dutch and Lawler, and I think that was the last full-fledged sellout.
Yeah.
Of the Coliseum. They had a big run there. And then I think Bill had gone back where he had been the previous couple of years for 86 to work for Watts in Mid-South, I think. And then, when Crockett ended up with the Watts territory, the UWF, and also they had been working for a little while with Jerry Jarrett in Memphis for those Starcade, not Starcade, but Great American Bash, joint shows. And, Dusty brought Dundee in, and obviously it would have been great. And I think Buddy, I can't remember what specifically it was, but when Buddy disappeared quickly, because Dusty would have used him again if he hadn't been Buddy. And then I think it was just trying to find something for Bill to do. And I believe he put him with the Mod Squad, because Mac and Jim Jeffers had been two of those guys we talked about earlier in the program, only doing jobs on outlaw shows in the Carolinas, but they actually were good. They were real brothers. They were, I believe, if not real police officers, sheriff's deputies, something in that line of work. And old J.D. Costello, who was for a while the ring announcer in Greenville, South Carolina, basically kind of took them under his wing and came up with a gimmick for them. And they had been doing jobs on Crockett's TV, and JD hadn't even been into business, but I had contacted, at the time Randy Hales had just started taking more responsibility for the booking in Memphis, and I got them booked in Memphis as the Mod Squad. And because J.D. Costello had done these videos with them in costume, and nobody did a video at that time, right? Unless they shot it themselves on their home, VHS camera. But this was like edited and produced and shit. And they had a pretty good little run in Memphis. And JD was their manager there. When they came back to the Carolinas and got booked, I don't think they were going to use JD because, when you come back home, you're always going to be, when they think of you as the ring guy. Oliver Humperdinck, did he ever work Minneapolis as a manager? He was the ring guy there or whatever. So they didn't book JD with him, but they used the Mod Squad some and put Dundee with him because he had worked with him also in Memphis. And that's a roundabout way of answering all those questions. But they were, but yeah, he was trying to find something for Bill to do because he was on the roster, and it obviously was not Bill's fault, whatever Buddy did to go sideways. So you try to, then come up with something else.
So much has been said throughout the years about Buddy Landel and what would have happened or what could have been if he hadn't messed up that first time with Jim Crockett Promotions. Of course, Buddy always said he would have been the NWA champion. I don't know about that. But, another guy who was part of that crew in 80.
And hold on, and hold that thought also, but just think about this. Buddy, in, December of 85, basically fucks up the big chance on TBS and gets fired from Crockett because when he oversleeps from partying the night before and doesn't come to Atlanta TV. And it's 3 months later, he's in Memphis and he's in the top angle and they've just sold out to Mid-South Coliseum.
Yeah.
He was still a fucking talent. He just, every time he got a big chance, anyway, go ahead.
Well, he was one of a crew of guys who lit up Mid-South Wrestling in 84 and then were immediately raided by probably more so Jim Crockett than Vince McMahon. If you really look at 1984 Mid-South, Terry Taylor was another one of those guys. I've always heard different things. What happened with Terry Taylor's run in 85 in Jim Crockett Promotions?
In Jim Crockett Promotions or in Mid-South or
in Jim Crockett Promotions, because it seemed like he was getting a good push. And then you always hear these stories now that Dusty got upset with him. Some people say that there was an incident on a plane where he started doing a Dusty impression and Dusty heard it. Do you know anything about what went wrong with Terry Taylor's first run with them?
I've heard that story, and I don't know if I don't think I was there. Terry was a great ring technician. And Terry, as a babyface, Watts tried to use him. I think he was probably the cleanest, nicest looking, best conditioned, best physiqued, nicest boy, most intelligent young babyface that Bill Watts ever tried to use in Mid-South Wrestling. And it didn't really work. He put the North American, and I'm not knocking Terry, but he didn't achieve the level of Magnum TA or Hacksaw Duggan or JYD in Mid-South as babyface in fans' eyes, because I just don't think that the final thing, which was his promos, was there yet. And then when he went to Crockett, was a dynamite babyface. I mean, in the ring, I don't want to say he was as good as Ricky Steamboat, but he was one of the better athletic, better looking and better working and better performing and better selling single baby faces, young white meat baby faces in the business. But his promo was not still there. And I think if he'd have had, if Mid-South or the UWF had lasted another couple of years where he could have finally turned heel and become a heel and become a cocky Terry Taylor heel instead of the Red Rooster thing, then because he idolized Flair and, in large part was inspired by Flair. And I think if he'd have taken that final step to turn heel then without basically the Red Rooster thing in the middle, nobody ever took him seriously after that. It was fucking goofy. By the time he did get to be a heel, it was in WCW in 1990 at the York Foundation.
Well, no, actually, he did get the turn. I mean, that's what makes it even sadder. He got the turn in UWF. He joined Eddie Gilbert's team.
Yeah, but that was
he took that heel
4 months, right?
Yeah, only a few months. And then he took that heel. I was about to use the word act. I know you hate, but he took that heel persona that he developed and he actually brought it to World Class. If you remember, the last good period of World Class was like 88, where all of a sudden Michael Hayes was back in there. Gordy was back in there. Terry Taylor and Chris Adams took their feud from the UWF into World Class, and then he obviously can't go back to Crockett because Dusty and him, it's not
okay,
working.
Well, hold on a second. I was going to say, if you'd have held a gun to my head, I forgot about the World Class deal because nobody was watching World. But here's the thing. He either turns heel in UWF in Mid-South where he could have then learned for a few years, but instead, a few months, it's gone, and he goes to Dallas when absolutely nobody is watching World Class Wrestling. So if a guy's a great heel in the forest, can anybody hear it? Whatever the fuck. Then, there's the Red Rooster. Then there's York Foundation when nobody's watching WCW and he's presented as a mid-card guy there. And he tripped over bad booking. But he was never going to be, I don't think, the guy as a babyface, but if he could have had more time to develop as a heel, and especially the way he could perform in the ring and just get by on the heel promo, much less perfect it, that's who Terry Taylor would have been for the next 10 years had not all that goofy shit happened and all of his territories fallen apart.
How do you think it would have worked out if he had been one of the fabulous ones?
Horrible. Because the thing is, Stan just barely made it. Kern, when you think about it, Kern was one of the most, I don't want to knock Steve here, but he was one of the most fucking rough looking fucking white meat baby faces you ever saw. He was, Stan just barely made it because they had those bloodbaths with the Moondogs and the fucking Assassins and all those brawls with the sheep herders. And and chairs and fucking boards and Fargo matches and shit. That was not Terry's thing. Terry was athletic. Terry was a classic Carolina style mid-Atlantic wrestling worker. And it just wouldn't have worked. He didn't want to bleed like that. Stan barely did. Kern loved it, I think. But it wouldn't have worked with the Fabs. He needed to be the cocky, arrogant heel after maturing and going as far as he could go as the all-American babyface. Did
he have a lot of heat in the locker room in the 80s?
It started developing. Well, Terry could say things, and he has said this himself. He could say things just without thinking about it that maybe he should have thought about to other people. But I never had any problem with him until, of course, he became a Russophile. And when I saw him in the same car together, I was like, all right, this is going to lead to no good.
Here's the last part of Matt's question here, question 3.
Well, he's taken up enough of the program, haven't he?
Speaking of tag teams, were the Kansas Jayhawks a reaction to all the pretty babyface tag teams of the time? Between Dutch's excessive body hair and Jagger's jiggly physique, I can't imagine those two were a big hit with the more discerning female fans.
Well, here's the thing. Dusty, I think once again, Dutch was one of those guys that had just previously been doing huge business in Memphis but wanted to make the big time and we were doing well at that point. So even the guys that were on the card rather than, just featured on top were making good money. And Bobby Jaggers was there. I think Dusty had a soft spot for Bobby Jaggers from Florida and whatever the fuck. And you could not find two more different individuals than Bobby Jaggers and Dutch Mantell. And of course, Dutch is not from Kansas, but Jaggers was established that way. So, and Dusty being a sports fan, the Kansas Jayhawks, because they looked like some kind of fucking Kansas Jayhawks. I don't know. And Dutch has got the whip, and Jaggers has the cowboy outfit, and Dutch has got a hat too. And he was just putting a tag team together. And because they were both pros, they were an easy team to have a match with. But Dutch to me was a more premier talent at that point than Jaggers was. But Jaggers was the guy that told all the interesting. He almost married Ann Wilson of Heart.
Bobby Jaggers?
At one point, according to hear him tell it, he did. And of course, that was after he had that accident where he was driving a brand new Corvette and like 125 miles an hour down the interstate. And all of a sudden he spun out and he flipped end over end and the whole car was demolished. And when he woke up, he was sitting still strapped into the driver's seat of the Corvette and holding the steering wheel, but the steering wheel and the seat weren't connected to the rest of the car on the highway.
All right.
Bobby Jaggers could tell a story. He could shuck the corn all the way down to the cob.
Well, let's see if this next question does the same thing right here. This one was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Red Haw Bushwhacker. I've been watching old NWA WCW pay-per-views and clashes from around 1989, around the time when the Freebirds won the tag team belts. They defended the titles at 2 clashes and Halloween Havoc 1989. I noticed Michael Hayes never had his tag belt, while Jimmy Garvin had his. What's the story behind this?
I wish I knew, but I would bet you something along the lines of somebody lost or stole one of those fucking belts and they hadn't had a new one made yet. Otherwise, I would really have no idea why. One time I can believe he forgot it, left it somewhere, whatever. But if it was multiple dates that they didn't have a tag belt, something, there were shenanigans going on.
Have you ever dealt with that? I mean, not even as a promoter, just something you witnessed where a guy claimed the belt was stolen and the promoter or the promotion really had a problem with it?
Well, no, because anybody that basically took the belt or kept the belt didn't come back. So you never came in and said, "Oh, I've lost the fucking belt, but I still want to work here." Right? It was always, well, Rude's gone or Bull's gone and he's got the fucking belt. And you never saw him again. So I can't remember anybody legitimately coming in saying, "Oops, it's been stolen or I've lost. I don't know what the fuck."
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Ryan Bendick. Hello. I live in the same neighborhood as a WWE wrestler. He lists who the wrestler is here, but I won't say the name. And his house is a little bit secluded from the rest of the houses, but no gate or fence. I'm sure people in the neighborhood know he lives there, but what is the proper etiquette for, introducing yourself and my kids? Is there a right way?
Yeah, don't do it. Fuck, if you see him come out of his secluded home and he's on foot where you could stop him or, it's not a traffic situation where you could wave at him or whatever, you might just say hello there. But if you go up on his property, at the very least, you're entitled to an ass whooping, much less, anything further, depending on who this unknown person is that I don't know. No, I wouldn't.
By the way, I will bleep this out.
I wouldn't I wouldn't go up on his property if I were you. That's just a word to the wise. No, but really, no, because here's the thing. Normal people, I say, but the way you know what I'm saying, people not in the wrestling business have people knock on their front doors every once in a while trying to sell them something, or maybe it's the next door neighbor or whatever the fuck, I don't know. But when you're in the wrestling business and people you don't know are knocking on your door, sometimes it generally doesn't end well, and you probably should avoid doing it. If you see him in a public area out around the neighborhood, that's a different story.
What are your thoughts on, because you hear a lot of debate about when it is okay, when it is acceptable to approach a wrestler for an autograph or a photo. What are your thoughts on that? Where is the limit?
Well, not while you're actually eating, and I don't mean while you're in a restaurant, but while you're actually picking up food with your hands and putting it in your mouth and people to come over and shake hands or take a picture or whatever. No, I'm paying a lot of money for this, and I've already prepped my hands for this. So I understand where people get hot when they're interrupted in a restaurant, but before the food comes or after it's done or whatever, I don't think that's unreasonable if you don't scream it out. "Hey, are you Jim Cornette?" in front of the entire restaurant for the benefit of the 8 or 9, out of 10 people that might not know who the fuck I am. And you know what? I can understand the guys being in bad moods in airports, especially if you're rushing trying to get somewhere. And I've had once or twice where I've just gotten out of my truck, a long drive, and I've gotten checked in, and I really have to piss. I'm seriously going to piss on you if you're standing in front of me in the next 30 seconds. People are trying to get my autograph. I'm like, "Brother, I got to go. My teeth are floating. I have to go now. I'm sorry." But I try to, accept any other reasonable request.
Do you have people approach you in the bathroom?
It has been done, but not in a long time. But yes, I've actually been sitting in a fucking stall and had hands come with pen and paper come under the fucking door. Yes.
Did you sign?
Yes, to go away now, please. Here, go be free.
All right.
Because then I had the pressure on me. I didn't want to make any noises. I didn't want to.
That's right. Yes.
Fumes, because now, and especially, it's bad enough when you're sitting in one of these. Because I travel, so I stop at rest stops. You're in a public bathroom with people beside you, and when you really either just let out a blast of fucking goddamn Arctic monsoon air out your ass, it just sounds like a goddamn explosion in a cavern. or it hits the water with such force that it sounds like a fire hose has been stuck in the bowl or whatever, or it really stinks to the point where it would gag a man eating Fremunda cheese in a septic tank of a slaughterhouse, then but especially if they know it's you in there and you're making all these fucking noises and he went, oh, it's so hot. Oh, it's so hot. See, if they know who you are and they hear that, it's even more embarrassing.
Who says that when they're on the toilet?
Don't you? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
All right. Well, our next question here was sent in the Corny Drive. Excuse me. I can't even speak. Was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Oscar Silva. This is a question about OVW. I know damn sure you've talked your ass off about Batista, Cena, Orton, and Benjamin, so it wouldn't be about that. I want to know about Rip Rogers. You don't mention him enough.
The Hustler. We've had Rip on the show. We've told stories about Rip. Rip has a new book out, which it's a guy basically because Rip tweets when he gets bored, he tweets on his phone. And if you follow Rip on Twitter, it's like a college correspondence course in wrestling so the guy has compiled all the tweets that Rip has sent out just on common sense things and do this and don't do that and whatever the fuck. And I guess it's on Amazon now. But Rip is famous for being, fucking Rip. He's a classic personality that you only find in the wrestling business. And so people, exaggerate stories, but there's always a foundation a grain of truth in almost any Rip Rogers story. Actually, more grains than not, probably. But specifically, Rip is, and he was one of the best trainers because he can talk to guys where they know he's real and he's not bullshitting them. And especially when he sets the all-time record for fucks or you fucking cunt or yeah, fucking rotten or whatever. And he didn't talk to the females any different than he talked to the guys, which got him some heat when corporate wrestling became a thing. But that's the whole thing. Rip is classic non-corporate wrestling. He's old-time pro wrestling. And if you listen to him, you will learn what to do and what not to do. But he was a hell of a fucking worker, sometimes too good for his own good, as he will admit, because sometimes he would shine more than the fucking guys that he was supposed to be putting over. But it's just because he couldn't help himself. He loved the wrestling business.
Was Rip popular with the students?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, to this day, even guys like Orton and them, they have a soft spot for fucking Rip because he taught them so much. But, especially to this day, the younger generation, Rip doesn't get in the ring anymore, but he tells them what to do from outside. But the younger generation looks up to him like some kind of fucking, probably a weird uncle that fucking failed the acid test at Woodstock.
What are the similar traits, if any, that you see amongst a lot of these guys? Rip Rogers, Tom Pritchard, guys who have become trainers, have become good trainers. What are the similarities they have?
The talent and the students believe them because they're not bullshitting them. They're telling them shit for real. They'll even tell them, hey, now you should never do what I'm telling you, but it's the right thing and blah, blah, blah. But, politically or philosophically or whatever. But, they sometimes like everybody says, well, Ric Flair should train guys. But Ric Flair probably is not in the top 100 of teachers because sometimes guys are just naturals and they just do, and they don't have a way where they can convey it in words where the mere mortals can understand it. But guys like Tom and Rip and Danny Davis was the same way. They can not only show you, but they can convey it to you and make you understand it. And just find different ways of getting through to guys and making them understand the difference and illustrating, what's what. That it's just a communication thing. I don't know how else to explain it.
Ric Flair famously only trained one student, and that was Stan Lane.
Basically, he trained Stan. Stan went over down because Rick was in Charlotte even then. Stan was in Greensboro. So Stan went down to Charlotte like days per week. And he and I think Steve Travis would run laps up and down Flair's, neighborhood in the subdivision. And then they'd work out in Flair's home gym. And then they'd more or less take bumps out in Flair's backyard. And that was how he got trained.
Has he ever said anything about Flair's reaction to it? Was it something that Flair was happy he did? Was it a couple times into it? Why did I agree to train this guy? What was Flair's reaction to all this?
No, he liked it because Flair wanted workout partners even then. I mean, you know, and Stan and Steve Muslin was his name then, since he hadn't gotten a business yet, and a couple of those guys that always were training with Rick in the Carolinas because they couldn't keep up with him, but they could half-ass push him a little bit, and he liked to be, you know, and of course, as soon as he met Stan, the honorary mayor of Myrtle Beach, even at that point, before Stan got into business, you know, they hit it off somewhat. So,
our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John in Walkertown, North Carolina. Why is it on Raw or Nitro in the 1990s, after a pay-per-view, they show still images instead of video clips to recap the night before?
From the pay-per-view, right, is what you just said?
Yes.
Yeah, because they're still selling the replay. Because as soon as the pay-per-view aired live, I mean, I think it replayed again immediately, but it was up on the primitive pay-per-view channels of the time for the next 2 or 3 days at least. So you didn't want to show any footage. And I mean, this is the only explanation I ever heard. You didn't want to show actual footage while you were still wanting the still pictures made it. Oh shit. I'd really love to see what the end of that bump or what the fuck happened next. And it was a tease for ordering the replays.
I could be wrong, but I think also for a time it was a request from the pay-per-view companies to not show any clips.
Well, yeah, because they were still selling the fucking replay.
But more than a WWE not wanting to do it, or WWF, it was the pay-per-view companies actually saying, "Hey, don't."
Well, yeah. I don't know until maybe the height of the Monday Night Wars or whatever if WWE was arguing about it though. But yes, the pay-per-view company didn't want it either.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Clint Davis. Basketball fans all know the legendary story of Michael Jordan scoring 38 points while playing with a 100-degree fever during the NBA Finals. I wondered if wrestling had any similar stories of someone wrestling in a high-profile match while battling the flu or some other awful illness. Are wrestlers able to call in sick, provided it's not a pay-per-view or something major?
Well, yes, they were. It was frowned upon in this environment. No, I mean, you know, if somebody was really deathly ill or whatever, or actively puking or shitting themselves, you know, but even then, I'll give you one classic example that I remember off the top of my head because I was fucking worried about this. Do you remember the Midnight Express versus the Fantastics in Chattanooga in 1988, the U.S. Tag title match where
44 minutes or whatever.
44 minutes. It was the entire 1 hour syndicated program, and the Fantastics won the belts from us. Then the old, actually souped up Lawler Dundee Memphis finish that I got Dusty to go for. Bobby Eaton had, his fever had to be 102 or whatever the fuck, but he was shitting and puking and sweating, that whole day and just looked horrible and pale. And I was wondering whether he was actually going to be able to have the match or not, much less we got to go the whole hour of the fucking show and do all this shit. And if you go back and watch that match afterwards and say who was sick, nobody would have ever known either the four of those guys were sick, but Bobby was horrible that day with a flu.
How was he after the match?
Horrible. Even worse. Fucking felt miserable. Goddamn, probably dehydrated at that point. But, you know, the lights come on and you got to do what you got to do.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Wallace GVC. Recently, you spoke about the Clash of the Champions, where the heels locked the babyfaces in the locker room. Brian commented, All Japan discontinued their relationship with Crockett, actually, not Crockett, but after Crockett, after that event. His questions, what was wrong with that segment that would cause All Japan to discontinue their relationship? And two, with New Japan's popularity on the rise, what is the All Japan promotion up to these days? Jim?
Well, yeah, good God. What is All Japan? All Japan split into two groups some time back, which was Noah and All Japan, right? And is All Japan... I don't know what the fuck All Japan's doing these days. I barely keep up with...
It's still around, but it's nothing like Giant Baba left behind.
Yeah, it ain't nothing to write home about. But no, as to why that they were so upset, Brian, help me on this. My God, if you lived in that time period, you know that at that time it was insulting. Both Japanese groups treated the business as a sport and as legitimate, and the idea that they sent these stars of theirs who were legitimate stars in their country to be a part of this national television show in America, and then had to report in the weekly wrestling magazines that were sold on the newsstands in Japan that they were locked in the fucking locker room like a bunch of bumblefucks by the goddamn heels and couldn't get out to have their match, the big 6-man world title match that was like saying that, oh shit, fucking Ali at the last minute got somebody to lock Frazier in the fucking locker room so he could beat up on Jimmy Ellis instead. It was fucking ridiculous, and it would just made the Japanese guys look terrible and embarrassed them in front of their people and their business.
And you couldn't hide it because also there were 2 weekly Japanese magazines who had coverage there, like full glossy photos of all this.
Yes, and they weren't the magazines of the promotion. They were actual like Time and Newsweek of wrestling, and they covered wrestling all over the world, and it was, yes. And those guys looked like fucking blithering simpletons.
So Giant Baba saw them, locked the Road Warriors and Tenryu in a room and just said, I've had enough. That's it. So I think that's pretty much it. After that, there isn't much relationship with Giant Baba and WCW, but New Japan obviously.
Tenryu at that time was their guy, right? Was their top guy. That's like when we told a story, but it tickles me every time when they were working with Pena in the WWF. And his heavy metal was the top babyface he had or whatever. And they were going to do a job or have him do a job in 5 minutes on fucking Superstars or whatever. And I said, why don't you just piss in his mouth while he's down there? You can't, just use anybody else. You can't just beat these fucking, if you're going to work with these people, you can't just take their top guys and make them look like goddamn Ned.
Our next question, Jim, was sent into CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Ned. No, this is, excuse me, this is from Joey in Marshall, Texas. I listen to everything Cornette and am slowly trying to catch up on the old episodes. Recently, on an episode of The Experience, you made a comment about doing shows in Crystal City, Texas, while working in WCCW. What in the actual fuck? For people who don't know, Crystal is a painfully small town in South Texas. There is nothing there and nothing close to it. Even now, it is a boring, dusty-ass town. It has around 7,000 people and oil and gas workers like myself who are subjected to the asshole of Texas for work. Where were the shows put on, and what kind of crowds did you see? It seems like it would be a horrible place to work then, just as it is now.
Yes. What it was those towns traditionally did not get a lot of live wrestling events, but they had, because even though it is out in the middle of nowhere down there, and I mean, somebody look at a fucking atlas and look at South Texas, just straight down south from Dallas and Houston and that the border towns and just out in the middle of nowhere, you could draw large crowds when the TV saturated the area. When Southwest Championship Wrestling was a big deal, Joe Blanchard's San Antonio office, and they would do a spot show every so often out in some of those wilds of the towns in a high school gym or a rec center or whatever the fuck. You could draw a decent crowd every once in a while. But in the mid-'80s, when we were down there for World Class, Southwest was, floundering, and the promoter of South Texas was that Fritz and the World Class office dealt with was a guy named Fred Barron. And he was trying to run San Antonio and some spot shows. And one time we were in Carrizo Springs. I've mentioned this before, where we were in literally a giant tin shed that seated like 300 or 400 people, but there was only 100 in it. In the middle of a mud field with a sheet on the front that said wrestling tonight, and night went down the side because they didn't plan ahead. Tonight. And you'd be in some of these places. I remember one time in Laredo, we wrestled in this place where we dressed in like the kitchen of whatever this, I think this was a place where they had like fucking quinceaneras or whatever, the Mexican equivalent of the bar mitzvahs. And it had a kitchen and had a low ceiling, so you didn't worry about taking any backdrops. But I mean, just some of these buildings that they could shoehorn a ring in, and they would get at that time in the mid 80s, maybe a couple of hundred, mostly Latino to the point where I don't think they were speaking a lot of English, fans to come in these just in the middle of nowhere towns. And it was brutal. And then finally it was a $100 a person guarantee, but you spent more than that to go down there. It was 500 miles from fucking Dallas. And if you flew, you had to stay overnight and buy a hotel. And it was horrible. And they had pretty much started phasing those out right as we were leaving the territory. But we just left the whole goddamn thing.
Another thing they started phasing out around that time, making money. But let's get another question here, Jim. This one is from Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Raymond Smith. Robbie Eagle, a.k.a. Robbie Kellum, is appearing at an abandoned mall in my town in a couple of weeks. Hold on. Do you have a message for him?
Who abandoned it? Why is it abandoned? What's happened to the mall?
Do you have a message for Robbie Eagle? Does he owe you money you want back? If not, do you have any stories? Tommy Rich will also be there.
Well, no, I love Robbie Eagle. Robbie Kellum. But he came to my attention as Robbie Eagles. He's from North Carolina, and he was a young rookie at the time I was running Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and I can't even remember now. I'm sure, maybe he could remind me, but I don't know whether I saw his tape or just somebody plugged him to me, but we booked him as a extra job guy to do TV one time, and he had some he was a good amateur wrestler. It had some training there, was a strong young kid, and just it was eager to please, had a great personality. And so we used him more often. I started booking him on house shows, even had him do some things with guys like, Candido when Candido first came in, and we did some special things with him where we treated him better on TV than just an enhancement guy. And he was always there, always ready to go. No bad habits, was a joy to work with, and also saved my ass. One night it was one of those Western Virginia little small towns that we would do TV tapings in or spot shows in. And we did a TV taping there one night. I don't know if it was Clinchport or Clinchco or Council, but it was way up in the mountains, and we all get ready to leave, and Robbie always stuck around till the end because he wanted to see all the matches and everything. He was very dedicated. I think he was traveling with his dad at that point. Anyway, I get in the car, me and Hildebrand, my car, and we're driving down the mountain, and it's like, it's going to be 30 or 40 miles down this mountain to get to a good 4-lane highway. So it's going to be an hour. And within 4 or 5 miles, I've got a flat tire. And I'm like, what the fuck? And goddamn, somebody came along, I can't remember who, and helped me change the tire because I had a spare. And we go another 3 or 4 miles, and goddamn, I got another flat tire. The fan had cut both of my tires. Stuck them to where they'd go down gradually, right? Didn't just slice them up. So they wanted to get me on the side of the mountain. And here came Robbie and his dad and helped us. I think he basically carried us to the only hotel in the area or whatever, but he stopped and gave us a hand and got me and Hildebrand off the side of the mountain. But yeah, that's what they do is they would stick your tires instead of cutting them. So that way they'd go down slow. And when you changed one, if they'd stuck two, you were fucked because who carries 2 spares? But anyway, I love Robbie Eagle. Yes, I do.
In ECW, you kind of saw it a little bit where Chad Austin started getting a push, and eventually it kind of went to Mikey Whipwreck, and that turned into that. Bobby Blaze kind of got that push as the undercard guy who started doing good and doing really well on TV. Was he the first choice for that? Were there other guys? I used to actually think with Robbie Eagle that maybe he was kind of being set up for a similar position.
Well, but here's the thing. You assumed that I was looking for someone to do that thing with rather than seeing someone that could do that thing. It's similar. I think Bobby, truthfully, I hope Robbie ain't listening, but Bobby was probably a little bit more marketable because I think he's a little taller and a little more impressive physically and had a little more experience at that point, and also was from Ashland, was right there. You know, I know Robbie was from North Carolina, but I think it was actually Western North Carolina now. He traveled a little bit, whereas Bobby lived there. But when Robbie, you know, he was a little bit more likable, had a little bit more charisma than some of the job guys that we use. So you could use him in situations with other heels to, you know, or if Tammy was to make fun of him or whatever. But he also had some fire to him and he could kind of handle himself, and he was a strong kid. But with Bobby, we just went farther with that the young kid that started at the bottom and has worked his way up and has been here and is all of a sudden he gets a couple of surprising wins and he's really coming along. And hey, folks, we've seen him develop and mature right in front of our eyes. This hometown boy, Bobby Blaze, from right here in Kentucky. And then gradually he went all the way in 2.5 years or whatever and ended up winning the Smoky Mountain heavyweight title. I didn't say the first time I saw Bobby, oh, I'm going to make him the hometown boy that does good and, you know, push him to the title as an underdog. It just started developing that way. And so you don't look for somebody to do that angle. You need to recognize when you've got somebody you should do that angle with.
And with that, the drive-thru is closed.
In a lesson about not putting the cart in front of the horse, we've closed up for the day.
We're shooting the horse. That's how we solve that problem. Of course, you can hear us this Thursday.
Nay, no, don't shoot the horse. Nay.
You can hear us on Thursday when we debut the newest episode of the Jim Cornette Experience, or listen to it anytime, wherever you find your favorite podcast, the Jim Cornette Experience. Of course, you can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, you can go to jimcornette.com for Cornette's collectibles. The holidays are approaching, and you got to stock those stockings or stuff those stockings.
You got to stuff it. Look, just stuff it. Just stuff the stockings. And if you want to stuff your stockings with the shit that we ship, then you just order that shit and we'll ship it as swiftly as we can. Shit can be swiftly shipped to stop your stuffings. What the fuck? Let me try that again. Take two. We're going to ship the shit as swiftly as shit can be shipped to stuff your stockings. That's what I was so clearly and eloquently stated just moments ago.
That's right, and there's lots of things you can put in those stockings, including DVDs, action figures, restraining orders, burger towels, t-shirts, autograph photos, books. I don't know how you're going to get a book in there, but you get the idea. So much more. Cornette's Collectibles.
That depends on how big your legs are. I tell you, my Aunt Lulie, she had legs. You could have got a book in her stockings. Now, it wasn't Aunt Lola. It was my great Aunt Lulie. Her name actually was Lulu, but they called her Lulie and her husband was Leslie. They just called him Les.
Well, once again,
they didn't want to call him anymore.
Well, once again, you can go to jimcornette.com for Cornette's Collectibles. But hey, what if your stocking is lined with some sort of thing that will give you a disease? You got to call Stephen Pinu.
Well, I think you've been hanging out in the wrong fucking part of town if your stockings are lined with shit that can give you a disease. That's what I think.
Well, what is that number once again in case I need some help on this?
Oh, for fuck's sake, call 888-692-8084 if whatever you have stuffed in your stocking. If it's rotting you around the crotch area, you'll need to call Stephen and get some antibiotics. Cream, I think, will help in that situation.
We'll see if anything can help this Thursday on The Experience, but until then, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!